We are now up to our long-awaited speaker, Angela Loeb. Many of you know Angela because years and years ago she was a recruiter, and then she morphed into and she was a longtime member of our board of directors. So we love her very much for that service that she provided to this organization, and she wrote some books on how to find a job. She went from recruiting to being a career coach. She is now a recognized expert in so many different aspects of the job search process, and a frequent speaker now, finally, again, at Launchpad Job Club. So her bio says that she provides resume writing and career advising services through her company, which is InSync Resources. She has worked with professionals in career transition for nearly 3 decades. Not possible. You're just a baby. Uh, and her clients appreciate her background as a human resource recruiter. She is also an instructor for the Center for Professional Education at the University of Texas, a co-founder and co-organizer of the Career Development Network, and a past Launchpad Job Club board member. Yay! She has written 3 books, published hundreds of articles, developed dozens of programs, produced over 100 podcasts. Oh my God, I'm exhausted reading this, about career and personal development. And you can learn more at something that does not print out here, insyncresources.com. Is that where you can learn more? All right, I'm just making that up, but I'm glad it was the correct URL. So let's give a warm welcome in our small numbers to Angela Loeb.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Kathy. And Shannon listed my website in there. That's great. I'm also going to put in the chat another place where you can check out some job openings, because in addition, there's a quote that I think it's attributed to Thomas Edison, which is, everything comes to he who hustles while he waits, or she who hustles while she waits. And I guess you could say that's what I do. Because in addition to all of that stuff, probably and more that we didn't put in the bio, I do a little bit of side work with this really cool firm called Austin People Works, which is not a staffing company. So they're not filling positions that are temporary jobs. But what they do is they are in a kind of an HR consulting firm. So small and mid-sized, really kind of cool companies, not just in Austin, but all over. One of their coolest companies they work for is based out of California and does a lot of remote employment. But they don't have HR people, or they need to have supplemental help in HR. So I help them kind of behind the scenes operationally, which is kind of cool because I get to see under the hood of what goes on with Indeed and what it looks like to post things. I get to write job postings sometimes. So even though I'm not recruiting anymore, and I haven't since 2009, I still have a pretty good network of HR people because I kind of hang out with them part-time. So just giving you a little background there. I prepared some slides to share with you guys. So I'm going to prepare some slides. I'm going to show you my slides and share some tips. But I love it that, on the one hand, oh, wow, there's a lot of people not coming to this meeting because they have offers in hand, or they don't think they need help with their resume, or whatever is going on. Or maybe they have interviews scheduled this morning, which on a Friday morning, scheduling an interview might be tough. But point is that on the other hand, we also have a smaller group. So I want to make sure we have a Q&A at the end. I want to make sure that if you have any questions about branding yourself through your resume and so forth, that we talk about your resume challenges. And so I'm going to run through my presentation, my tips for you. And definitely, if you have any questions, or you want to go back and talk about anything, or pretty much anything about job search, you can ask at the end, because I definitely want to make sure we have room for that. So let me just go ahead and share my screen and I'll dig in. All right. So this is a program that I've been giving off and on since, 2009, 2010, at Covenant Presbyterian Church, when we used to do our career transition series. This was one of the programs that David Hewen asked me to do. And I've kind of fine-tuned it over the years, and it's a little bit different, but for the most part, we're pretty much, solid, because resumes have a core foundational purpose and what they're supposed to do. And that has not changed over the years. It is so funny because I've been working on resumes as a freelancer on the side, even when I was a recruiter. So since 2006, I've been helping people with their resumes, and, you know, like hands-on, helping them as they are my clients, helping them with their resumes. And, you know, it's funny, every once in a while we hear things like the resume's dead, the resume's dying, the resume's going to go away. And it never does. So I just, back of your mind, keep that in mind, that some things about the resume just doesn't change. So that's why I think some of the core principles I'm going to talk about in here are just, they're stayed and true. I would imagine some of you guys are, I don't know, we may have varying levels of experience in the Zoom room here with people knowing about resumes, having a pretty in-depth knowledge. Maybe you've attended every job club presentation under the sun about resumes. Maybe you've read about it extensively on the internet, and maybe all of that has confused you too. So that's a possibility. I like to say to people all the time, which is you can ask people about your resume and get so many different opinions and conflicting opinions. And you can ask me if you wanted to about something that is a challenge on your resume, and I might have 3 solutions for you. So that happens. And so at the end of the day, though, you have to understand what the core fundamental things that you're trying to do. And I have a caveat, a disclaimer, if you want to say it that way, that I want to put out there right away, which is, even though resumes are my thing, I love resumes, it's kind of the air I breathe. I was a recruiter for about 15 years, and that DNA is just kind of cooked, it's kind of baked into what I do and how my perspective and how I look at things. I probably have reviewed 500,000 resumes in my career. So I am of a mindset always from that perspective of being a recruiter. But I also am a career consultant. I'm a pragmatist. I understand the ins and outs of what happens and all the kind of challenges that happen in a job search. I probably, like Kathy, probably have heard everything. Sometimes we still can get surprised when you do this long. And the bottom line is that you can have an okay resume. You can even have no resume, actually, and get a really great job. So your resume is not the panacea. And a lot of times what I'll see is people coming back to me and saying, you know, I've been doing this job search and I'm not getting anywhere. I think I need to work on my resume. I think I need to tweak my resume. And sometimes when we start talking, we start realizing that they're messaging the way they're saying it, or their personal brand is kind of off. They don't even know how to say it. They don't even know what it is. Or they might have an ineffective strategy to uncover the opportunities that are right for them. Or they're doing a career change, which is totally different. And it's very hard to put on a resume, a career change, which in this presentation, I'm going to show you. I have a little case study about that to show you what things you might be able to do with your resume to send forward a better message about career change. But the point is that you can do all of these things, and at the end of the day, it's the people and the connections you make in your job search that is going to be the number one reason you will succeed and get results. It won't necessarily be the resume, though you do want a good resume. If you're going to ask a friend to forward on your resume, you want your friend to feel proud of the fact that they're forwarding on a good looking resume. So I totally get that, and I think it's important. And to me also, when you're working on a resume and you've got one that really works, you feel confident. It helps to shift you, and it gets you right about what messaging you want to present. So when I put people through their paces and tell them, I want you to answer these kinds of questions to make sure we develop the right resume for you, they often tell me, wow, I never thought of these things before, and this is going to really help me in my job search efforts. So the resume work can be more, it's more than just let's throw your biography down on a page. It is way more than that. It is a marketing document. It's not a legal document like an application is, right? But it's a marketing document, and you need to make sure that you're marketing and messaging yourself well. So that's kind of the premise. I want to lay down a foundation before I get into these tips and notes that I'm going to share with you. And the first thing I want to talk about is, you know, there's a lot of, I don't know, vanilla resumes out there, a lot of kind of average looking resumes out there. And when I say average looking, I don't mean that they just are black print on white paper or a white screen. I don't mean that they need to have color. And I'm not a big fan actually of these infographic style resumes, because my background being a recruiter, I want to get into the hardcore information. And I want it to be presented to me in a fashion, in a way that I can quickly digest and quickly assess the suitability of the candidate, so that I can then go in a little bit deeper and look through and see. So there are things you can do that make your resume more memorable to that recruiter or to that hiring manager or whomever is going to read your resume. You want to kind of make sure that you're attracting their attention and keeping their attention, and you're not making them go, okay, next. I've got 200 resumes here to look at, or I have 50 resumes to get through. So how do you stick out? How do you stand out? So that's what I'm just kind of the premise behind this too, and the tips I'm going to give you. But before we get into the tips, I want to talk about how recruiters read resumes. So if you didn't know this, you probably, maybe by now you've heard this. It's funny, when I started to really get into the nitty-gritty of presenting this information 10 years ago, like everybody was like, what? It only takes 8 seconds, 10 seconds for someone to scan your resume. That's all they spend on it. Well, that's all they spend on it initially. If they like it, then they'll go back and read it further. I remember in one podcast that I did, used to co-host a podcast on job search. And we interviewed Ken Kuznia, who was a recruiter. And one of the things he said is, yes, we certainly would love it, to think that a recruiter takes your resume, opens a bottle of wine, builds a fire, and then just sits there and just really pours over your resume. But no, that doesn't happen. 8 to 10 seconds. If they see what they like, then they'll go ahead and again, they'll read through it a little bit further. They're also, my understanding, one of my colleagues and a good acquaintance of mine is Dan Medlin, and he's been a recruiter for 30 years. I'm sure he's presented to Launchpad Job Club before. He has the STAR workbook, is superb at what he does. And one time I was talking to him and I said, hey, tell me about social media and how much does that factor in? Do you look at LinkedIn? What's the story on that? He says, as soon as we've got the resume and we're opening it up, we're not even past the contact information. We're also opening up all the social media profiles. So you have an entire picture that you're presenting to the recruiter, not just the 8-second scan. So, but you're always, of course, trying to capture that first impression. And you've possibly heard the term above the fold. So when you think about it, when you if you open up a resume on a computer screen, the first thing you're going to see is the top portion of the resume. I don't care if it's a PDF or whatever, it's going to be the top portion of the resume, and then you scroll and see the rest. So whatever you put at the top is really where it's most important to capture that attention. And I would say, your most valuable real estate. So how are you using that above the fold? And when we say, of course, above the fold, we mean, when you have something and you fold it in half, what's above the fold, right? So I think that is pretty obvious. And it comes from, if you're curious, if you're a trivia person like I am, it comes from newspaper days, when we would go to the newsstand and we'd actually buy a newspaper, actually hard copy newspaper, and it was folded in half. Journalists and the newspaper companies knew that you put your headlines, you put your most exciting things on the first page at the top above the fold, so that it would attract attention and buyers of your newspaper. So it's the same concept. It's marketing. Another thing that recruiters do when they're reading your resume is that they want to see what your expertise areas are, what you have mastery over. And this is another, I'm stealing this from Dan as well, Dan Medlin. He said one time, he says, we all talk about how we're the jack of all trades. And I was just working with a client yesterday who had essentially said that. And he said that on his LinkedIn profile. And I said, yeah, but what happens to recruiters? They see jack of all trades and they think the rest of it is master of none. The other thing that is important to a recruiter is, and this is something that I think a lot of times, if you've not been in the shoes of a recruiter, or you've not been in the shoes of someone who's making that crucial decision, especially in the initial stages of screening candidates, that it is really important to look at the industry and the role. That how they want to know, how close to the industry is your background? Have you worked in our industry or something similar? Will you get us? What's going to be the ramp up time? How smooth is it to get into the industry? Now, this is not a hard and fast rule. I'm not saying this is blanket across the board, but this is very common in a lot of different industries and trades. Exceptions, of course, are all over the place. I was working with an individual recently who is from the oil and gas sector, and he's a metallurgist, and he's super, like he wants to get out of O&G. So he's thinking, I would love to work for Tesla. Well, Tesla came into Austin, not with the idea that they're going to find people with automotive background. They came into town knowing that they're going to have to recruit from people from other industries. So there are some companies that are realistic about this and understanding that they are going to have to be open to different industries depending on what's in that geographical region, economically speaking. The role is the other thing too. So a recruiter wants to know, can you handle this role? Are you ready for this role? Or are you going to be under challenged in this role? So it's very important to them that they get that fit right, and that you have done similar scope of responsibilities, that you can, they understand a bit of a jump, like you're ready for the next level. They totally get that. But for them, it wouldn't be like a big leap. They may shy away from that. Or if it's definitely a step back, and it's an obvious step back, then in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I might talk to this person, but I'm a little bit worried this is a red flag. Again, this is generalities, and there are always exceptions to these rules. But I'm just trying to tell you that these are the challenges that you may be facing, and you may not even know it because you're not maybe thinking like the recruiter thinks. And so I wanted to give you some insights on that. Okay, the other thing I want to mention when we talk about resumes is this idea that you have a uniqueness or a certain like personal brand. One of my favorite articles about this and context about it is the Tom Peters article that he wrote in 1997. This was before we had Facebook. This was before we had LinkedIn. This was way back in the day before, companies had websites, but we didn't have personal presence online. So there was no way for us to promote our own brands the way we can now. All we had was our resume, basically. And this article he wrote in Fast Magazine is still out there. It was republished by Fast Magazine, I think in 2007, 2006, something like that. So you can still find it online. I would recommend you go find it and read it. But I lifted this quote from it. He says, all of us need to understand the importance of branding. We're the CEOs of Me Incorporated. So, you have the responsibility to present that information, to articulate that. If you leave it to a recruiter or someone else to say, okay, here's my information. Now decide what you want me to be for you. Decide what you want me to do for you. Again, going back to the jack of all trades, master of none kind of thing. I'm not saying that you have to be some sort of specific specialist. But thinking of the fact that your background and what you bring to the table, so to speak, is there are some things in areas of expertise that you're particularly good at, that you enjoy doing, that you would want to keep doing. And if you are enjoying it and you're good at it, you're going to get results. You're going to have successes and success stories. So that is something that has to show up on a resume to really make it memorable, to make it stand out. And too many people are just kind of glossing that over and leaving it to them to analyze it, or for them to figure out your brand for you. But if you are articulate and you state it clearly, you're going to be ahead of the game. You're going to have a resume that stands out better. Okay, so how do you figure that out? I have this really quick, acronym I like, WOW, the WOW point. And I think it's just an easy way to remember that there are three things that you're getting to. That's why I have three darts in the bullseye here. Three things that you're trying to think of. What is it that you want? So this is what I want to be doing. Okay. And this is what I want out of the company and my experience. And I want the experience of this step in my career to be like. You know what you want. Okay. You know what you offer, or you should know what you offer. And that should be clearly, of course, stated on the resume. And then you also have to keep in mind, what does the market want? So this alignment has to happen, or this three darts in the bullseye has to happen, where you know what you want, and your offer, it pivots around it. What you want and what they want is what you offer. Okay, so if you're keeping that in mind, then you'll understand the content that needs to go on the resume. Instead of putting everything you've ever done, you're putting the relevant information. And this is, of course, how we keep things and contained into a 2-page resume. And yes, 2 pages is what I recommend. I know that's probably a question. So I'm just heading that one off at the pass. 2 pages. All right. There are 2 components. I'm not going to go in a lot. We could spend half a day easily going into resumes in depth, but I'm just going to skitter on the surface and tell you about the 2 major components that if you don't get these things right, then you might be, having a kind of a plain or average resume. And you really want to raise it up to make it memorable. You really need to do your work that you need to do in the summary. And you also need to make sure that you're highlighting accomplishments. And sometimes people will, I don't get this as much anymore because it's so commonplace. We all kind of get it now. Again, when I first started presenting this information about 10 years ago, people were like, oh no, accomplishments. I don't want to brag about myself. That feels so awkward and uncomfortable. But I always really go back to, and I think it was Bear Bryant, the coach, Bear Bryant, who said, it's a sad dog that can't wag its own tail. So, or maybe he said, if it ain't true, it ain't bragging if it's true. I can't remember which one he said, but it was these Southern sayings. I love them because this is true. The thing is that a recruiter, a hiring manager, they can't open up your head and look in there and see it. You have to actually articulate it. This is why they ask you questions like, what is your proudest accomplishment? Or what is your greatest strength? Tell me about a time when you had to overcome this. And then they want to know the story and they want to hear what you've done. And we like to see numbers. We like to see metrics. We like to know that there was impact. So if you think about accomplishments from the point of view that you're basically proving, you're saying, this is what I'm good at, and here's some evidence. Here's some proof of it. Here's how I fit into the organization, into the team, into the project or that situation. And this was my role in it. Here are the actions I took. And you don't have to claim this as a personal accomplishment. It can be a group or a team accomplishment or an organizational accomplishment. So making sure those are on there and it's grounded and it's not too vague. And I'm really speaking to salespeople when I say it's great to talk about how you accomplish quotas and over this quarter, over that quarter, and that's awesome. But there's not sometimes context about how you did it, and then we kind of go back to the uniqueness or the personal branding of it, and then some contextual things like this was a tough account to win because these were the challenges, and then we overcame it, and then we meet the quota Q over Q. So those are some of the ideas that I have for you. So let's get into the summary. I'm going to talk about the summary first. So in the summary is where you tell it. I like this kind of flipping the old kindergarten thing, where we did show and tell, but instead tell and show. So in the summary, you're going to make statements, and the statements need to be concise. I'm just going to tell you right now, recruiters don't care too much about the adjectives. They call it fluff words, or it's gray noise to them. Dynamic, hardworking, great work ethic, excellent communicator, that kind of stuff. So what? Everybody says that about themselves. So it's gray noise to them. So I'm not saying not to say to provide those intangible qualities about yourself. I'm just saying that we want you to show it to us. What does that look like in action? Everybody says they're a problem solver, that they're results driven. Give me the results. Don't just tell me you have results. Show me the results. So I just want to kind of let you know that the summary needs to be concise, and there are certain components to it, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But it's where you say what it is that you're good at, what you're doing, that you do. That is what they also want you to be good at. And then you will demonstrate it with accomplishments and the scope and the job responsibilities and tasks that you performed and so forth later in the resume that demonstrate what it is that you just said about yourself in the summary. Okay. Now, I have an easy way to remember how to format the summary, because the components of a summary are that you have a main statement that says what you do, specifically like the role or roles that you are in. Sometimes you might put industry or industries that you might want to mention. But you definitely want to put your expertise, like what you're definitely known for or that you want to be doing. And that's your first statement. As a matter of fact, I call that the positioning statement. You're positioning yourself in the mind of the reader of your resume. And this is a marketing term, okay? Because you are marketing yourself with your resume. So how would you market yourself? It's almost like if someone said, you're doing your introduction to someone and they say, what do you do? And that's your positioning. Your first thing you say is you position yourself, your positioning statement, but you're putting this on the resume. And the other thing you have there, you also have buzzwords or the keywords that they would search on to make sure that you have the qualifications. This is, of course, the easiest part, I think, of doing the work on the summary, because what you do is you look at the jobs that you're interested in and what are the words they're using in those jobs. And I don't mean the intangible things like hardworking, good communicator, team player. That, again, I recognize those intangibles are important, but if you fill it up with that, they'll totally ignore your summary section because they're like, oh, great noise. Where's the good hard data? The hard data are the skills of your work, of your job, of your industry. So those buzzwords need to be in there in that summary as well. Sometimes they're in the positioning statement. Sometimes they're wrapped up and mixed into the branding part. Sometimes there are keywords, keyword section or a text box, a table. So there's different ways to do this in the resume. But your personal brand needs to be kind of wrapped up in there too. And it's kind of like this whole, like the way you're presenting yourself is your personal brand. I want to give you an example of what I mean, because we're talking in abstractions here. So I usually don't like to put a whole bunch of words like I'm getting ready to do on a screen, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you some idea of what I mean. And this is someone that I worked with a long time ago, and I was still a recruiter when I worked on this resume, by the way. So this goes to show you what, 15 years ago, I was doing this resume, and the same principles apply. Now, over the years, when I've used the sample, I've modified it a little bit, brought it up to date, but in effect, it is essentially the same thing I provided to him. And you'll notice, because I had the recruiter mentality, I didn't let this individual get away. He didn't get away with a lot of adjectives. Okay, so here's the example. Here's his positioning statement. You can put whatever you want for the position, which is marketing professional. You can say marketing specialist, marketing manager, whatever, social media, specialist, whatever it is. You can say whatever that marketing title is or role is that you're seeking and that you're qualified for. And that's the key. It's both what you're seeking and qualified for. With a passion for, okay, here we're having some branding here coming in, and then designing and implementing strategies that increase name awareness. There's an expertise. Okay, so pretty succinct. Now, in this next sentence, you'll see a couple of instances of the intangible qualities. Intangible qualities are exceptional communication and creative and innovative ability in problem solving. Whereas presentation skills could probably be considered a more tangible skill, a more role-oriented skill. And then long-range planning also kind of borderlines a little bit, but there you go. Now, the rest of this profile, and you'll notice I just did this in a bulleted format. There's all kinds of ways to format this. I'm just doing it for ease to show you, the bullets. But strengths include, and we've got all the buzzwords, all the stuff that he has to do in his job, and that he likes doing in his job, and that he wants to attract more work to do in the next job. And then he's proficient in certain things. The Oreo cookie works like this. You start with something solid, a title, a positioning statement. You put anything, you know how the Oreo cookie has the fluffy center. In the middle is where you'll throw some of the fluffy stuff, right? And then you always have the bottom cookie or the bottom of the summary with more hard data. So initially, when he first gave me his resume, he put his bilingual skills at the bottom of his resume at the end. And of course, we moved it up to the summary because that's something that's a plus, and especially in the Austin market. So I'm giving you some ideas of how to structure the summary. Also, another thing we can do is if you look at this, we have a positioning statement, which is the marketing professional, right? And what if you don't want to be pigeonholed to one thing, one title? Maybe there's multiple ways to say what you do. Maybe you want to be considered for multiple types of roles or roles that are hybrid. And it's so difficult because so many companies have different names for different things, and the industry also does often change some of the titles. You can use a headline. Thank you, LinkedIn. They gave us this great way to actually put it on a resume too. And in your LinkedIn headline, if any of you are using LinkedIn, I'm sure you are, what happens there is it defaults to your title and company, your most recent title and company, but it's a free form field and you can put whatever you want in there. There's two major ways. There's all kinds of creative other ways you could do it, but two major ways that we approach it, either by stating titles and roles, or we can use functional things that you can do. So here's an example. Hopefully you can see this on the screen, but this is from a real resume that I worked with somebody. Sales professional, team leader, sales trainer, and coach. Sales professional and a sales trainer and coach, very different, okay? And this individual wanted to emphasize the leadership ability. So team leader came there and was part of this kind of hybrid presentation of the areas and the types of roles that he or she was interested in. This is when you're doing titles and roles, but you can do this with a functional approach. This individual I was working with was seeking something in the nonprofit sector, and she had experience with volunteer coordination, team leadership, and program support. So these were the functional areas that she decided to highlight about herself. And therefore, she can start right into the key strengths, as you can see, and doesn't have to claim a particular title. So there's different ways that you can maneuver with the headline, and it kind of be part of the way you position yourself. It expands the way you position yourself. I love headlines on resumes and use them very frequently. All right, let's move into, I know I'm moving fast, but again, I want us to be able to have time for some Q&A. So the accomplishments need to be there. I mean, if you don't have something on your resume, it's like you have a barren resume compared to so many people who are doing this. You really need to be competitive, with your resume. And I have this acronym that a former manager went back. This is from back when I was recruiting a manager that I worked with. I brought her a resume for an individual I had interviewed as an accounting and finance professional. And I was really excited. And she had a company, she was trying to put this, fill I think it was a controller position. And she said, great, tell me what their MSA is. I'm like, what do you mean? What's an MSA? And she said, oh, that's my acronym. Made, saved, achieved. So made, meaning making money, all right, or making some sort of process that increases efficiency, because that's where the S comes from, the save, which is save time and money. So if you've had any instance of saving time and money, or you've increased productivity, you've made money, you've saved money, all that kind of stuff is so that's what companies care about, right? That's what they really care about. So, and even if you're a government entity or a nonprofit organization, you care about these things. And then the A is achievement. So wherever you've been recognized for achievement, by either your employer, a team, or maybe it's an industry achievement. So different things that are very obvious achievements. Sometimes the achievements are just the award itself or the recognition itself, and may not have numbers, but they're powerful to state those. Task descriptions is a thing I bring up because a mentor of mine used to ask, she said, always ask when you're looking at the content of what you're providing on your resume, especially in the job descriptions, you can ask yourself, so what? So what does this mean to the person who's reading it? So what happened next? Is there something that happened next? So you did this, and then what did it lead to? Well, there are some results. So what happened next? So the so what test is like a relevancy test. Is this relevant content? Is it relevant to what it is that I want? And does it support the branding and the messaging that I'm giving about myself? And is it relevant to what they want from me to be able to do for them? So you really can look at the task descriptions that you have on your resume currently, and you might have some gold in there that you didn't even realize. You might even realize, oh, do I have an MSA here? Do I have something that I can actually look at and think, oh, the rest of the story is the result of what happened next? Using numbers whenever is possible is super helpful because numbers just pop. They pop off the screen, they pop off the page. And so using numbers is, I think, super helpful. Not too many numbers. I was just working with an individual in her resume recently, and she had like a gazillion metrics. And I was like, okay, wait a minute, we got to back this off because to the eye, now the eye is it's just too much. So within reason, you use some metrics. A lot of people will kind of freak out about this going, oh my gosh, I didn't keep track of that. But sometimes you can actually just extrapolate, or you can say, use approximate, that you may not know the exact number, but maybe you can approximate. And sometimes approximating is better, or being a little bit vaguer than to be very specific, because it might be proprietary information that they don't want you to necessarily share on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile. So use your thinking, your creative thinking skill here to determine that. And then, of course, the question I often get is, where does that go? So you can put that, of course, in the work history. And there are different ways to format how you would put that in the work history possibility. But my favorite thing to do is not to stress yourself out too much with loads and loads of accomplishments in the work history, but rather think in the terms of a highlights section that would either be part of your summary or positioned between your summary and your experience section. So you kind of sandwich it there. And so it works really well to like put a few highlights in there, maybe just 3. Maybe all you need to do is come up with 3 success stories that demonstrate what it is that you said about yourself in the summary and shows that you make an impact, that you have evidence of the impact that you make in the organizations you've worked with and worked for, or the customers that you've served, or whatever. So to me, that's my favorite place to put it, so that you're not, again, going exhaustively through thinking, oh, got to come up with some, accomplishments for this job and this job and this job. I've had 10 things I want to put on my 10 companies I've worked for. That's a lot of accomplishments to be thinking of. So, and you want to keep it to 2 pages, right? So to me, it's a great way to actually show some numbers, show some successes, have a very tight, concise narrative about yourself where you're saying what you do, you provide evidence of what you do immediately below that, and then the experience section becomes more context. They can say, you're basically telling them, here's where I worked, for how long I worked, the role I had, the scope of responsibilities, how much revenue that company had that I was responsible for, or whatever, or the employees that you managed, or whatever the scope of the responsibilities are. You can be a little bit more generalized there, unless there are specific things that you want to call out. But then that's the beauty of the career highlights section. What if you're looking at a job and you're thinking, they're calling it something different than what I would call it and what I have on my resume. And I have an example of something that they're talking about in this job description that I'm not really embellished too much or emphasized on my resume. That's the beauty of the summary, and that maybe you have a headline. Your headline, you can maybe modify the word a little bit to match what the job is requirement. And then you could put a success story. You can replace one of your success stories, or you can edit it to where you can fit an extra success story in there. So to me, that's where the modification comes in the targeting of your resume. All right, so here's some examples of accomplishment statements in case you're wondering what they look like. They can be short, they can be long. I'm a mixture here, okay? The very first one I have is a super, super short one, and it's save $9,000 by negotiating a new vendor contract. Woof, that's very, very short. But I'm bringing this up because I want to talk about situation, action, result. This is a thing we use in interviewing. And in interviewing, what we do is we will ask a candidate, tell me about a time, tell me a situation. And then we'll guide them and we'll hear what the actions and how they thought and what their behaviors were. And then if we're good at this kind of interview, we also ask for results. On a resume, you're not talking about the situation in depth. We have no idea what the circumstances behind why there needed to be a new contract and why you needed to negotiate it and what the story is. The backstory can be told in the interview, but you're teasing it by mentioning it. And you can say in the interview, as you can see on my resume, I negotiated that new vendor contract. Or they might say, tell me more about this. And then you can tell them the backstory. So situation, action, result is a really great technique to use to come up with your few success stories that you want to give on your resume. Here's some examples. Productivity. I'm not going to go through all of this exhaustively because of the time, but streamlining financial reporting process is the action, and there is a result of 32% increase in productivity. This next one has two results: developed and implemented a web-based forecasting system. That's the action, and it reduced variability in data, and that's one result, and it improved forecast accuracy by 22%. So it reduced this and improved that, and the action is developed and implemented the system. So you see what I'm trying to say here? There's not like this backstory about why this was needed and what the circumstances and the challenges were and the goal was, but there you go. You can do this with quantity and scope or volume. Again, you can use numbers in this case. Writing so many articles, being involved in the production of so many units per month. Recognition and achievement, like we mentioned. Sometimes, of course, these have numbers, sometimes they won't. Surpassing quarterly goals, winning competitions, getting awards, and so forth. Now, I want to very quickly run through, and this has another example, which you'll see. Someone who actually took this program, came to this presentation, and then came up with all these components on his resume, then came to me and said, now I want to change my career focus. In his situation, he was trying to make a significant career shift. And so it was the similar. So I'm going to show you the industry and job. Like, this is when he was looking for something in the same industry and the same job, what it looked like. And then I'm going to show you when he shifted into a different role in a different industry and the subtle changes he made. Okay, so again, a lot of text, but I'm going to walk you through real quick. He has a headline, as you can see, corporate real estate management site selection. And he says he has 16 years experience in it, is how he starts it off. And then if you look at this, he has these particular strengths, and he has put 3 different strengths, okay? He has this key competency list as a table, which to me is probably a little overburdened with intangibles, but it's not too bad. But site selection, leasing, pro forma analysis, those are definitely the buzzwords of his business. And then in his notable contributions, you can see he has 5, which they're short, and that would probably be the max that I would probably put in a career highlights section like this. Mind you, this person, we're not showing you his experience, but he has his experience, and it's a 2-page resume. Now, when we started looking at, okay, this new thing he wanted to do, which was to go for a sales job, is something he had background in, but he needed to leave what he was doing for a while because of the market, the economy response, and so forth. So he said, look, I can't find what I'm looking for, but I can do sales. So I want to get a focus back into that part of what I do. So we did this analysis of some postings. We pulled 3 postings, and we looked through different postings, and we just kind of highlighted all the different things they had in common. And after doing that a few times with the few different postings, we kind of extrapolated that there are some main things that they were all pretty much asking for in common. And we wanted to make sure that was reflected in the way we were remodeling his new resume. So going for a sales role in a new industry, a new role in a new industry, you'll see we changed his headline. He has 23 years if he added it all up, because even in site selection, there's a sales and account management aspect to it. He was using those skills. And these are the various industries that he wanted to call out. You'll see in the strengths, he just basically added 1 extra or 2 extra ones. And then he changed up his key competencies a little bit to be more appropriate to that focus. And he took out a lot of the corporate real estate kind of lingo and terminology from his notable contribution section. So it wasn't too centered on that. So that's my little quick case study I wanted to show you about how those components work. I love this Mark Victor Hansen. He's one of the co-authors of Chicken Soup for the Soul. Your resume is never going to be perfect. If it's 6 weeks later and you're working on your job search and you're still working on your resume, that's called procrastination. Your resume will never be perfect. It's an ever-changing thing. It is something you will modify. And so I just want to make sure I plant that seed in your mind. Just go for it. Get going. And sometimes the you put it out there and then you see what happens. You see what kind of responses you're getting. You never know if your resume works until you actually use it. And then if you're getting people that are talking to you about the right jobs, then you know it's working. Okay. So thank you so much for letting me kind of zip through these. I'm going to leave a few minutes at the end so we can have some questions and answers. My website again, nseekresources.com. I offer free initial consultations, so feel free to, pick my brain for advice. I have tons of resources on my website, like articles, the podcasts. Many of the resources are free, so help yourself. Okay. So questions?
I have a question. This is Kathy. So, in your slide about 5 slides ago, just before you got to the case study, your last bullet was something like where to go. And I don't,
where the accomplishments go, you mean?
I think it just said something like where to go.
Hey, I'll go back and you can tell me. I feel like I'm hitting rewind. This one?
Where do they go? Oh, where do they go physically on the page? That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Never mind. You did cover that.
Now,
Okay.
if you meant where do you go to get the numbers? Well, you're going to have to really pay attention in your performance evaluations. You're going to have to think about those projects that you've worked on. You might have to seek out old managers that you worked with and get some context. I had one client who was very clever. He said, my company had a really good marketing department that put out press releases all the time. He was an R&D engineer for the chip manufacturing company. And he said he found, because he would work on projects and they may not ever see the light of day because they're an R&D stage. And if they do get rolled out, it might be 5 years later after he'd worked on them. So it was hard for him to know what kind of bigger picture impact they might have made. So he looked at what the marketing department was putting out for press releases about those projects. And that's how he got some of the information that he could share on his resume. Very interesting. Yeah. Anything else? Anyone else?
Angela, I have a question. Hi, it's Millie Flannery.
Hi.
Hi. I'm an accountant, and you'd think with being a numbers girl that it would be easy for me to quantify accomplishments, but no. So, what is your advice?
Millie, one of my favorite client, well, it wasn't a client, actually. I was a recruiter at the time, and I was interviewing this accountant. And one of my favorite conversations I still remember when I was like, raise the eyebrow, because here I am, a recruiter, and I'm listening for impact. I'm listening to how this person, are they self-aware enough of their impact in the organization? Do they have organizational awareness, that kind of thing? I know, I saw you just wince there. And she said, I know, because I was asking her, I said, tell me about, accomplishments, where you made some impact, where, what are you proud of? Like, what did you accomplish here at this job? And she said, when I came on board, they were not automated in a way that made any sense. So I introduced a new tool, a document sharing thing that took this report that we were working on. And it was like, it took us 3 weeks to get the report done. But as soon as we started with this new platform, this new tool that we started using to automate the process, it turned into 3 days. We were able to. So she implemented a new process, a new tool that ended up increasing efficiency. And of course, the leadership could have that data a lot faster to make more real-time decisions. So you can still capture that on a resume. You know what I'm saying? If you're saying it in an interview or you're talking to someone about it, introduced technology tool that reduced reporting time from 3 weeks to 3 days.
Okay.
You've got numbers, you've increased productivity, you made an impact. So you've done things. I had an administrative professional one time say, I don't know. I mean, I did revamp the filing system when we used to have like hard copy filing systems, right? And she said, I revamped the filing system and set up this barcode issue, and it increased our efficiency that way. And I was like, okay, that's what you need to make sure you're capturing. Sometimes you have numbers and sometimes you don't, but showing that you had a goal and you accomplished the goal
Right.
is really what's impactful. Does that make
I
sense?
guess, yes. And I guess ferret them out with a partner, because I'm a bookkeeper for a nonprofit, and I'm the financial girl. I'm it. So there's a lot of things I do, but sometimes I don't, like you said, I'm not self-aware of the impact.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
I think I
And
need to
impact
ferret it
doesn't
out.
have to be, and impact doesn't have to be like that R&D engineer. I mean, bless his heart, he really wanted to show impact, like organizational impact with a Fortune 500 company, which is big, you know, but you don't have to. It can be small. It can be to your customer or to your team. Whomever you're, you know, impacting could be around you. You're a smaller circle of influence, but it's impact nevertheless. You're making some sort of difference. And the good news is I'm letting you off the hook. You don't have to come up with a zillion of them or 10 of them. All you have to do is come up with just three success stories. Now, I would recommend that you have more for when you go through the interview process. And you do that simply by taking the job posting, the idea of taking the job posting and then looking at all of the items on the job posting, everything that's in bullets, everything that's in the summary, and then thinking, okay, what's an example of me using this skill? And then I got results using this skill. What's an example of when I had a project similar to this that required this? And you can do this with the intangible qualities like team player. And if you think to yourself, well, that is one of my best traits, that I'm a strong team player. I work collaboratively with people. That's my secret sauce. Great. You claim it, but then demonstrate it somehow with some impact that it's made.